From dog tags to ownership, heroes take the lead. Stories of veterans building trains with passion, drive, and speed. From service to success, we're here to inspire the quest. Dog tags to ownership, we're the best. Take the prize.
Welcome back to Dog Tags to Ownership, the podcast where we share the stories of military veterans, military-connected entrepreneurs, and business leaders who have turned their dog tags into ownership.
Every week, we bring you conversations designed to help you navigate entrepreneurship, leadership, and life after service.
Today's guest is someone who has changed the way businesses think about podcasting. Tom Schwab is the founder and CEO of Interview Valet, a veteran-owned company that pioneered podcast interview marketing. After serving in the U.S. Navy, operating nuclear reactors, Tom built a company that has helped thousands of entrepreneurs, authors, and thought leaders grow their businesses by getting in front of the right audience through meaningful conversations, not just marketing.
If you've ever wondered how podcasts can become one of the most powerful tools for building trust, creating authority, and generating business opportunities, this episode is for you. Tom shares why you're not one funnel away, you're one conversation away.
So whether you're launching your first business, growing your brand, or looking for new ways to tell your story, grab a notebook because this conversation is packed with practical advice.
Let's get into it. Here's our conversation with Tom Schwab.
Today's guest has helped redefine how entrepreneurs build trust, grow their businesses, and become recognized experts without chasing algorithms or going viral. Tom Schwab believes that every conversation is an opportunity to serve. Instead of interrupting people with ads, he teaches business owners how to earn attention by sharing their expertise on podcasts that already have the audience they're trying to reach. His work has helped thousands of founders, authors, and business leaders turn meaningful conversations into measurable business growth. He's a proud Navy veteran, an entrepreneur, best-selling author, and the founder of Interview Valet, the company that helped pioneer podcast interview marketing long before it became the most powerful way to build a brand. Tom, welcome to Dog Tags to Ownership, and thank you so much for joining us today to discuss your journey from turning your dog tags into ownership. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. Thrilled to be here.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on. And I know before I hit record, Interview Valet was a huge sponsor of Military Creator Con, and the things that you all do for the military community and to help creators and those get their brand out there is super impactful. But before we get into your company, could you first just tell our listeners and followers a little bit about yourself and your military service?
Well, it only makes sense in the back rearview mirror, right? I got into the Navy on a technical error. So I was accepted to the U.S. Naval Academy, went there, and my senior year, I was my pre-commissioning physical, and they looked and said, "You don't have depth perception." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know that." And they're like, "You can't be in the military without that." And I thought, oh, they're going to kick me out. But the old needs of the Navy, right? They're like, "Oh, we'll get you a waiver for that, but you'll never go to sea." And I was like, yes, I'll be a CB, right? Well, once again, the needs of the Navy, they needed nuclear power people. So they told me that they'd give me a waiver and I could either go surface warfare or I could go surface warfare nuclear. And one of them came with a bonus. So I took surface warfare nuclear, did nuclear power school, loved that, got to meet so many great, smart, hardworking people. Then I was on the pre-commissioning crew of the USS Abraham Lincoln. At the time, she was the newest and finest aircraft carrier. Now she's just the finest, and got to go around the world, was part of Desert Storm and Desert Shield. And my year group got out, or at 92 when my commitment was up, was when peace was breaking out. The evil empire had been defeated. And so I looked at it and said, I'd done everything that I wanted to, and it was having a toll on my family. When people tell me, "Thank you for your service," I would say, "Thank you for paying for my education." I had fun. I said, thank the families, because I had fun doing what I did, but the families are really the ones that really sign up and support all of us.
Tom, what inspired you to serve, and what inspired you to go to the Naval Academy? Did you have family members that served or grandparents?
So I came from a Navy family, Great Lakes Naval Training Centers in Chicago, where I grew up, or Great Mistakes. Everybody that's ever been there knows it is Great Mistakes. And so I was exposed to it a little bit, but I'll tell you what, the thing that was the biggest impact is there I was in high school, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do after high school. And I was working summer jobs and everything. And I'd seen a lot of people that I knew that were a couple of years ahead of me that came back and they were doing the same jobs. And then there was one guy I knew that went to the Naval Academy. I had no idea where it was, but he came back and he'd just been to Australia. He was home for like 3 weeks on vacation before he did something else. And I started talking with him and he was telling me all about it. And I'm like, wow, this sounds great. And I think at that time I was too young and dumb to realize that it wasn't an option. So I just thought, yeah, let's do that. And like I said, by the grace of God and a clerical error, I got in.
Tom, when you decided you were going to transition out of the military in 1992, where did you transition out of, and what was your thoughts that you were going to do after the military? Was it that you wanted to get in entrepreneurship, or did you have other aspirations or goals that you wanted to do?
At that point, I would say no on the entrepreneurship. I looked at it and thought, well, I want to get into the corporate world, go from one big company to another big company. And Stryker Corporation, big medical device company, recruited me. And we always joked that they recruited military because we'd show up and work half days. We'd work 12 hours a day, show up on Saturday, and it'd take us 18 months to realize that's not the way the world works. By that time, we were successful and we got promoted. So I went to work for them as an engineer and spent a few months as an engineer, and then went to production supervisor. And then I went to distribution manager. And while I was having success there, I looked at it and thought, this is worse than being in a submarine, because I was in one building all the time. So I wanted to get out into sales. And so that's when I got out into sales. And I think that started to open my eyes of, maybe job security isn't having one paycheck from one big company. Maybe it's I'm an entrepreneur and I have different paychecks from different clients. After selling for about 6 years, we started a little sideline business. And that was sort of my first toe in the water on entrepreneurship. And it turned out to be HubSpot's first e-commerce case study.
So it wasn't something that you necessarily deliberately had a plan for. It just sort of happened through a natural growth, I guess, and wanting to do something different in sales.
Yeah, I think so. And now, granted, I'm of a different generation, and entrepreneurship wasn't as sexy of a word as it is now. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Back then, entrepreneur was a synonym for unemployed, or no one will hire me. And so I think at that point, I sort of fought it. But once I got into it, I felt like this is what I was made for. This is what I love. All my skills come together with it. And I was recently back at Annapolis, and they now have an annual alumni entrepreneur summit. And it's amazing the people that have become entrepreneurs and taken what they learned in the military and really are helping the world with that. And I always say I went to one of the best business schools out there. Anybody that's been in the military, you've learned more in the military than you'll learn in an MBA. Years later, I went back and got my MBA to prove to myself that I knew business. And I don't use it that often, but what I learned in the military, I use that every day.
You started your first sales type job that became for HubSpot. What was that, if you can? What was that company? How did you found it? What were some of your lessons as you were going through that first entrepreneurship journey that you had as you were building that company?
It was called Goodbye Crutches. And if you've ever seen somebody who's broken a foot in their ankle and they're sliding around on one of those knee scooters, when we started the company, there was no national distribution of that. So we started it just locally based on a need. I was selling to orthopedic surgeons and they're like, I can't find these things anyplace. And I did the research and said, okay, all you need to do is buy them from here and then rent them to your patients. And they're like, no, I don't want to do that. You do it. And so started to do that, and happy customers brought other customers. And it was one of these things where I think I went into it, once again, not smart enough to know that it's supposed to be harder than this, having that curiosity going in there. And the other thing that I learned is there was a joke that we had, and it was always, you have to be smart enough to know right answer when told. And that was like my lesson for entrepreneurship. When I'd have a customer said, you should do this. And I'm like, I just showed you how you could make money, right? And they're like, no, you should do it. I don't want to do it. And then they'd introduce me to other people. And so many times our clients will tell us exactly what we're supposed to do. You can have a business owner that has opinions. You can hire consultants that will tell you what you should do. But to me, the thing that always works best is listen to your customers. They'll tell you what they love and what they loathe, and stop doing one and double down on the other one.
So would you describe yourself as an idea person? And I guess the second question, did you always have a good team around you or a partner with you on this journey, or were you going at it single-handed?
Great question. And I've always been, I'd call myself the visionary. Some certain people are ready, aim, fire. For me, I was always just like, let's just pull the trigger and walk them in. Let's just fire. I've got a bias for action. That being said, I've always surrounded myself with great people. You know, my bride, I've always referred to her as my bride, even though we've been married 18 years now. She's been a great sounding board. While she supports me, she always pulls back and says, have you thought about this? Does this conflict with what you said before? But I realized, just like in the military, I can't do this all myself. So trying to find great people to come alongside me in there. And we've got a team now of 22, and 2/3 of them are military spouses or were military spouses. And I always say my microphone makes me sound good. My team makes me look good, because these people are such hardworking. They need a little bit of flexibility in their life, but they're hardworking. They're dedicated. They know discipline. And to me, that's really the key to growing the business too. We can only work so hard ourselves. And you know what? It's a lot more fun with more people too.
So you made a comment there, Tom. You said you're a person that just takes action. And I feel like that is a trait of most military members. We usually see something, run at the sound of guns, whatever it may be, and just go dive in and take action and figure it out. Has that always been who you are in your entrepreneurship journey? Is you see something and you just go with it and build the company and just take off from there?
Yeah. And there's a study called the Gallup survey, and it's like gives you your top talents. And one of mine is activator. And it's always like, yeah, let's take action on that. And there's other people that will spend a lot of time planning and thinking. And I think the world needs both of those. Like I said, I'm the one that pull the trigger and walk the rounds in. I had a boss one time that was always ready, aim, and I'm like, are we ever going to pull the trigger? And it was always good, because when I was talking with him, I'm like, when are we pulling the trigger? When are we going to do this? And I would talk with him, and if I had an idea, I was going to do it, but I would always ask him, what am I not seeing in this? What have I forgot? What's going to bite me in the rear end? Mm-hmm. So I think there's that benefit there. But I think today more than anything, man, a bias to action. The world is moving really fast. And I think the most dangerous place you can be is sitting still.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we've all had leaders, for better or worse, that we've modeled maybe our behaviors after. And some have been too deliberate and some have probably been too hasty in their approach. And it's always trying to, I think, find that fine line, right? It's very elusive. But if you can hit it and you can get the planning portion right and the action right, it sort of comes together. So does that start to take you to where you are now, or what are there other companies in between that initial company and where you're at today?
Yeah. And so, I worked for Stryker. I learned a lot from them. Great company there. I was a distributor on my own. Goodbye Crutches. We built that up from a regional player to a national leader, sold that off. And after I sold that company, people asked me, well, how did you grow it? And I'm like, we did it all with guest blogs, tap into somebody else's audience. But by 2014, blogs didn't work anymore, right? They were getting saturated. So I hypothesized at that point, I bet you could use podcast interviews to tap into people's audiences, get that know, like, and trust. So we started to test that once again in 2014. And I had a cheesy little PDF that I give people. I wrote a course that I never took out of beta. And the people that were taking the course were the ones that said, I don't want to learn how to do this. You do it. You let me be the guest and you take care of the rest. One of them said that. I'm like, oh, that's good copy. I'm taking that as a tagline. And so we started Interview Valet, which was basically leveraging other people's audiences, get on podcasts that your ideal clients are listening to, and share the message there. And for that first couple of years, I really thought we were way, way too early, because I'd give my elevator pitch in, what'd that be, 2016, 2017, and people would go, what's a podcast, right? And then it started to take off 2018. And once again, sometimes there's things beyond your control. I didn't teach the world about podcasts. COVID hit and corporate America found out that they could use this medium. We were there at the right time. And then about end of 2024, it was clear that AI indexes all the podcast interviews. So from that standpoint, people are going on podcast interviews now just for AEO or, to get those recommendations. So it's been a evolution. And at each point, I'm like, I'm having more fun and see more opportunity now than I ever had.
Interview Valet started 2014, 2015. Is that right? Time frame?
Correct.
I was listening to podcasts then. I was a huge podcast junkie back then. But I will say what you just brought up is that you thought you were ahead of the market. And we've heard that a few times from some of our guests. So did you have to pivot as you were building Interview Valet to ensure that you stayed within the market and what you were doing to help people get onto podcasts? How has the company evolved in how you market folks to get onto podcasts from the early days of podcasting to now where there's so many podcasts?
Yeah. Early on, we had to explain to people what it was, why they wanted to do it, and it was a big education thing. And now people understand it. So it's more of a qualification thing and a differentiation thing than at the beginning we were trying to teach the market. And, Christopher Lockhead, we all met him down at Military Creator Con. He was an early client and he's been a great mentor, great friend, a great client of the company. And he was the one that early on, he found us to promote his book. And I can still remember talking to him, and he said, sounds to me like you've got a new category here at Interview Valet. And I said, nah, it's a little bit of marketing. It's a little bit of PR. And he said, why won't you claim the category? And I said, because then I'd have to teach the market. And he came back to me and he said, can I be honest with you? And I said, sure. And he's like, you sure it won't hurt your feelings? I said, I've been in the military. I can guarantee you I've been called worse by better. He paused and he's like, you need to grow a pair and own this and bring it to the market. So I read his book that weekend and became an evangelist of category design, and he's helped us with that. So we always look at it as podcast interview marketing, and it's tough when you're starting because you're not just trying to, well, I'm just like this person and I'll take a little bit of business here. No, you're trying to be brave. You're trying to be bold and say, this is the problem I see in the world. This is how I see it differently. You'll either turn me up or turn me off. People will either think I'm a genius or an idiot. Either one is fine. But I really look at that marketing should be a magnet, not a megaphone. And too many people are out there just trying to make noise. No, I want to go out there and be very clear what I do, what I believe, who we serve, and it'll attract the right people and repel the wrong ones.
Who all do you serve with Interview Valet? Who are your ideal clients that you guys bring in to help their brand, what they're doing to get on different podcasts and get their name out there?
Yeah. I look at the world as missionaries and mercenaries. So we work with missionaries. These are the people that believe in it. They want to go out and evangelize for their category, their company. They want to attract the right clients. So we focus mostly in business. That's our largest vertical, but also in health, nutrition, and wellness. So typically it's a company that has a higher level engagement. I don't like the term big ticket sales, but it's somebody that it has to be a relationship sale that they know when they talk with the right people, that they get business from it. And the larger geography they can serve, the better podcast interviews are for. If you can only be my client, if you can drive to Kalamazoo, that limits the world. But, today, if we can work with anybody, that helps. So we're working with a lot of category designers, coaches, consultants, and nonfiction authors.
Tom, when you went, I guess, all in, if I could say that, on this category, this approach, when was that, and how has your clientele grown, since you made that decision to really direct a lot of the focus and energy of the company in this particular direction?
We started that in about 2017. And at first I thought, if we get too focused in there, it's going to limit the market. It was actually just the opposite. Since 2017, I would say we've been refining to get tighter and tighter. And one of my core values is hell yes or no. Once you know who you serve, what you believe in, and what you want to be the best in, it's much easier to make that determination of hell yes or no. With every client, with every engagement, I'm looking at, do we know their audience, right? Can we find that on a podcast? Have we worked with other clients and brought them great results? And then finally, are we excited? Are we proud to amplify this message? If those all three are heck yes, we take it to the client, and there's not a whole lot of pressure there. I'm a hell yes. I'm sold on it. I'm not trying to sell them. I just say, this is how we see it. Let me answer any questions for you and help them to get to that hell yes or no. To me, it's a much, much easier sales process and less tiring.
With all the clients that you've had, and really we'll get in with your category and the folks that you've been helping, what are the numbers, I guess, that you've seen from your clients and their ability to reach different markets through the help of Interview Valet and getting on different podcasts and advertising themselves, marketing themselves and what they're doing? How has that improved or helped those businesses scale or just amplify their message?
Yeah. There's so many different ways you can do it. Like I mentioned today, that's how you get found on AI. And because of podcast interviews, our clients see more and more AI referrals. Other ones see the leads come from it, and they're reporting leads that close faster for a higher initial amount because it's based off of conversations, not just an ad. We've even worked with companies, I can think of 4 of them now, that have sold, and they have all come back to us and said their valuation of the company was higher at sale because they were micro famous in their industry, and people were buying the notoriety there as much as they were buying the company. So those are all, big ticket items there. But I can think of one client that we worked with that used it, well, a couple of them, but one stands out that used it to figure out who his ideal market was. Craig Cody is an accountant. He's got more personality than any accountant you'd ever want to meet. He's a retired New York City detective. And when he came to us, he said, I want 50 different clients in 50 different industries in 50 different states. And I'm like, why? Well, all of his business was brick and mortar on Long Island. He's like, I've got to diversify, and I think I can use podcast interviews to do that. So we start getting him on podcasts, and it's like throwing darts at a dartboard, right? Any business is good. After about 5 or 6 months, we're looking at the data, and he had just been on a dental podcast, and it was like fish in a barrel. And we took it back to him, and we're like, you did great on this. And he's like, oh yeah, I already signed up a client from that. I think I've got a couple more that are scheduled for a call. And he's like, I love dentists. They're recession proof. They're good cash flow. They're professionals. So for the next 8 months, all he did was dental podcasts. He had his own dental podcast on that. And that's one of those things where I mentioned before of, knows the right answer when told. So many times we have like this vision of, well, this is what my ICP is. This is what my ideal client is. And then you can go out there on podcast interviews and figure out if the market really loves that. I can think of another client, Carla Fowler. She's an MD. She's a PhD, super smart lady. But when she started, she didn't have much of a social media. So after all of her interviews, we'd make those clips for her, right? The little video clips, and she'd put them up on social media. And if people engaged with it, she's like, yeah, I need to talk more about that. If they didn't engage with it, she's like, oh, nobody cares about that. I've got to stop talking about that. So it's this idea of using it to get feedback from your clients too. And to me, it's a much more personal way of marketing a company. There's so many things out there that we're getting more efficient at things that are getting less effective, right? In the time we've been talking here, each one of us could have sent 1 million emails, but it doesn't mean that it would help our business. That's why I think the conversations are so powerful.
I think that's awesome. Just those two stories that you told, the CPA that's now like got all the dentists. What is your thoughts on the relationship between podcasts and social media? How do you think that those two things play together? And how do you teach, or how do you all help your clients with that relationship of social media and podcasts and getting their name and brand out there?
Well, Julie, you mentioned before that you listened to podcasts back in 2015 something?
I started in like 2012, like when it first came out.
All right.
Serial was my the first Serial series got me into podcasting.
So you remember what a podcast is. A podcast goes on an iPod, and you used to have to download it. You'd plug the cord in and it would stream there. And those iPods, they could hold hundreds of interviews or episodes. Now, I'm amazed they still call them podcasts, because what is a podcast? Well, today, 96% of podcasts have video. YouTube's one of the biggest search engines for podcasts. And so I look at that and say, well, if somebody hears me on AM radio, it could be a podcast that gets redone. Sirius and XM, a lot of that is podcast. So what is a podcast anymore? I don't know. I don't really care, right? All I want is to make sure that people hear me when they want, where they want, even at the speed they want. So a great example of that is, I think podcasts and social media sort of go together. Everyone says Joe Rogan gets heard by 100 million people. During the election, they kept saying, oh, his podcast heard by 100 million people. If you look at the data, he gets 2.5 million downloads per episode. Number one podcast. The other 98 million, they're saying, oh yeah, I listened to a 90-second clip of Elon Musk. I listened to that podcast. So I think it's that same thing of, we can create in the way that's easiest for us and then repurpose it, right? So we'll both take this interview, we'll slice it up, we'll put reels, we'll put it on our social media. There's transcripts of it. People will read that. You can make blogs out of it. AI is indexing podcast interviews because it's human content. So someone is going to have part of this conversation referenced in an AI chat. So it's like, is that a podcast anymore? I don't know. I always look at it as we're at a point in the world today where we can create in the way that's easiest for us and then recreate and repurpose it into other areas there. So I always look at it as when people say, well, should I do video or audio or a LinkedIn article from this or social media or video? My answer on that is yes. Why do we have to choose? Just say yes.
I think it's so neat too, because Julie came up with a concept for dog tags to ownership, and it was really going to be focused on helping people transition out of the military and then kind of giving those tips for those that are interested in perhaps owning a business or doing something outside of a 9-to-5. But so much of this has become just like good, genuine conversations. And you never know what direction it's necessarily going to go. And you never know who's going to be listening. But as I drive to projects that I'm working on, and you have a podcast going in the background, maybe it's something it's funny that you get just a laugh out of, something that's educational. It's almost like fiction, nonfiction. But there's so many things that I think can just, again, like you said, Tom, there's a soundbite. There's just a statement made by you on our podcast that someone like picks up on, and it just kind of lights a fuse for them. It like turns on the lights, and that's what I've been waiting to hear, what Tom said on this podcast, and they can go in a completely different direction. I think that's so cool with what's out there now, the different content.
Yeah, we live in an amazing time. And one of our clients spoke in Miami at the ballpark there. spoke to 30,000 people, and I was with him the night before, and he was nervous. And I'm like, you've talked to more people on this on a podcast. And he's like, yeah, but they weren't looking back at me. So for him, it was much more comfortable to speak on a podcast than to be on a stage. And later we talked about it, and he made the point when he's on a podcast, if somebody gets interrupted, they can hit pause and they can come back to it. Where he's like, when I was on the stage there, I'd see people grabbing their phone because they had to take something, or they'd respond into a text. They weren't even listening. Or maybe they heard something great when he was talking, but then they had to explain it to someone else or had to pitch it to their boss the next week. The chances of them remembering it correctly are so small. He's like, when I'm on a podcast, they can pause it. They can come back to it. They can forward it on to somebody and say, Matt, you should check out this podcast. Minute 12 is where I thought of you. Mm-hmm. And so that shareability of it is just amazing there. And his point is that he thinks while talking to 30,000 people in Miami was an ego thing, he thought that a bigger impact would be talking on podcasts.
That's pretty powerful, honestly, for him to say that. But what I'm thinking about as he's saying that, it's so true that people's attention spans nowadays, when somebody's up in front of you speaking, you got like 5 seconds, 30 seconds max to tell them what you need to tell them and get your point across. But like to Matt's point about a podcast, people listen to them when they're driving to work, coming home, going on a run, walking, whatever it may be. And they have that time to digest and not other things going on in their lives. I never even thought about that, but that's super interesting that he said that. Tom, what has been in your entrepreneurship endeavor, what has been one of the biggest challenges that you have faced in building and growing your business?
Patience. Patience is a virtue. It's not one I have. When I pray, it's usually God, give me patience and give it to me now. Things take time. And, whenever I'm doing something, I find that it always takes twice as much time and twice as much money. And so trying to give myself grace with that. I think too many people, wherever they are, they look at that next rung and say, oh, I want to get there. Enjoy the path with that. And there's a great book by Dan Sullivan called The Gap and the Gain. And he talks about most of the time we look at the gap. I look forward and it's like, oh, I only need this many more clients or this many more sales, or all my problems would be gone if I got to this point. We don't look back and say how far I've come and how proud of myself I would be if my past self had found this. And I'll give you an example of this. The only reason I remember this day is because my wife forced me to stop and celebrate it. So I had applied to talk at 2 different events. One of them was Entreport's convention they do in Santa Barbara called Entrepalooza. And then the other one was HubSpot's event called Inbound in Boston, right? Each one, I was probably talking to 500 people. The other one was probably talking to 2,000. At that point, both of those were on my dream list. My vision board, they're both on there. Both of those invitations came through in the same day. And by that afternoon, I was already working on that next thing. I didn't take time to celebrate it or have the joy in that. I was working on the next problem. And my wife, God love her, my bride, said, she got a bottle of champagne and we went up on this hill on our property there. And I think she said, give me 10 minutes. We celebrated it for 10 minutes. And then I was on to the next problem.
And that's so relatable, I think. I'm thinking about that as I'm sitting in a property that I'm renovating. And it's just constant. It's like, I got to lay floor, then I got to trim this and I got to do that. And you're like, and then just occasionally step back and say, look at what I've created, look at what I've done, and have that moment of appreciation. And it's kind of like, all right, time to get back to work and finish it out. But I think that's so important to stop, take a moment, at least daily, and just really appreciate, what we've got, right? That kind of daily reflection.
I think the military was great at that. With ribbons, awards, promotions, whatever it was, they celebrated those and made a big deal of them. And I've even written letters of commendation for our teams and stuff like that. All those boilerplate things. You want to have a fun Zoom call? write one of those up and read it out in front of the team. Even better, make sure their family is in the room with them too. And we're all like, oh, it's corny, another plaque. But I tell you what, I've been out of the service for decades. And as I look across my office here, I still see the plaques that I was given. And so, yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's a big thing that I have to remind myself of too, of having the patience and then celebrating the little wins along.
Yeah. And the wins are the things that I think also help us keep that momentum to go forward. So taking the time to celebrate those as well, so that it does drive you to continue on whatever your purpose or your path is. Tom, what would be one piece of advice that you could give to a military member or a veteran who is looking to turn their dog tags into ownership?
It's something that I think is going to be chiseled on my gravestone. What's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And you come out of the military and think, well, I don't have this. I don't have a business degree. I don't have this. I don't have the experience. But what you have is amazing. We, as humans, we tend to overestimate and overvalue what other people have and underestimate what we have. The things that you have done by the time you were 19, most other people haven't gotten that responsibility before they were 30, if ever in their life. The challenges that you have had to endure, most other people haven't. Most people have never, they'll complain about dealing with a mad client. What if a client gets upset or something like that? It's like, once again, that I've been called worse by better. And no matter how bad this day gets in business, I can look back and say, oh, I've had a lot worse days. And you know what? I love Interview Valet. I value our clients and all we do. It's very important, but nobody's going to die here. And I couldn't have said that in my whole life. So all of those things that sometimes it's the stories we tell ourselves that we can't do it. So I would just say what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And it's so amazing that they will go out and they will pay you for it. That's how you can be an owner.
I love that. That's awesome advice. So we're wrapping up here on time. But before we get to our last two questions of every episode, is there anything that we did not ask you today that you would like to tell our listeners and followers?
I think there's one thing that I'd like to encourage people here. And it's this, if you ever get an email from me, the last words in it are going to be, stay strong. The world needs to hear you now more than ever. And Julie and Matt are laughing because they're like, yeah, I've gotten those emails. I put that in there as a reminder to people, but also a reminder to myself. There is a lot of problems in the world, but there is no better time to be alive. And there's a lot of negative things that are getting amplified. You, me, we all need to stay strong and share with the world what we know. It needs it now more than ever. So that's the encouragement I'd make to people.
No, I love that. And because you never know who you're going to run into, who you're going to talk to, whose day you might change with that positive mindset and attitude. It's contagious. And if we walk around with our head down, complaining about everything, that's also contagious. So I love that, Tom. I think I get to ask the first of our last two questions. You've already mentioned a favorite book. Can you recommend something, a book? It could be a podcast or an audiobook that you would recommend to our listeners that's been impactful for you.
I was going to say anything from the category Pirates. You heard me referencing them, Christopher Lochhead and Eddie Yoon. I think they've got a different way of looking at the world. How can you be different, not just better? How can you own it, not compete in it? And once I saw that lens of that category design, it changed the way I looked at it. So that's what I would recommend. Just check out Category Pirates.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, love that. And just recently we had Jamie J and Sarah on our podcast, Bottleneck Distant Assistance, and we talked about category design with them as well. So our listeners and followers are getting a lot on the category design, and we're true believers here at Dog Tags to Ownership. So thank you for mentioning that. So our last question of every episode, Tom, is Admiral William McRaven authored the book, Make Your Bed, Little Things That Can Change Your Life and Maybe the World. So Matt and I are going to bet first on this. I think you make your bed. Matt thinks that you make your bed. So Tom,
Wait, I'm going to caveat. I think his wife might make the bed, but I think it gets made every day. That's my
That's your bed.
specific.
All right. So, Tom, do you make your bed every day?
It gets made every day, and we have sort of a contest or a challenge on who makes it first, right? If somebody's out of it last, they'll probably make it first. But there are times where one person will go downstairs to make the coffee and the other one makes the bed before they come back up. It's a great way to start the day.
Tom, thank you. Thank you again so much for coming on our podcast. It's been a pleasure. Obviously, you've got podcast skills. You're one of the easiest interviews I think we've probably ever had. I love the commentary, love the guidance that you've given. And again, I think you'll certainly inspire others that listen to this podcast episode. So thanks again for being on.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all the work you do. Anybody that says doing a podcast is easy has never done it or never done it well. It's the great ones just make it look easy.
What an incredible conversation with Tom Schwab. His reminder that relationships outperform algorithms and conversations create opportunities is something every entrepreneur should hear.
If this episode brought you value, make sure you subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with another entrepreneur who's building their own journey from dog tags to ownership.
And before we go, it's time for this week's Forces Brands USA Business of the Week. This week's spotlight is Oscar Mike Radio, founded and hosted by Marine veteran Travis Partington. Oscar Mike Radio has spent years amplifying the voices of veterans, service members, and military-connected leaders through authentic conversations that inspire resilience, purpose, and continued service beyond the uniform. Travis has built a platform that reminds us all that no one has to navigate transition alone. If you're looking for meaningful stories, veteran resources, or another outstanding military community podcast, be sure to check out Oscar Mike Radio. And of course, you can find them on Forces Brands USA, the only online marketplace dedicated to military, veteran, and military-connected businesses.
Remember our hashtag Replace One Challenge. Replace just one product, one service, or one podcast this week with one from a military, veteran, or military-connected business. Together, those small decisions create a massive impact across our community.
Thanks for listening to Dog Tags to Ownership. Until next week, keep serving, keep building, and keep turning your dog tags into ownership.
From dog tags to ownership, heroes take the lead. Stories of veterans building trains with passion, drive, and speed. From service to success, we're here to inspire the quest. Dog tags to ownership, we're the best. Take the prize.